Lyra had always been a symbol of hope for her people. The planet of Elysis had once flourished with life, filled with forests, oceans, and skies that were as beautiful as they were peaceful. But now, she was the last of her kind, and she had been captured by the ruthless Jarkon. The Jarkon were a fierce and warlike race of aliens who had been spreading across the galaxy, conquering planets and enslaving those weaker than them. They had invaded Elysis, destroyed the beautiful landscapes, and taken its people as prisoners. Lyra, with her silver-blue skin and bright purple eyes, had stood out among the captives. The Jarkon knew she was different, and they were determined to find out why. Lyra was kept in a cold, dark cell. The walls around her were smooth, metallic, and unfeeling. Her shackles glowed with a dull green light, keeping her from using her strength or her unique abilities. They had tried everything to break her spirit: cruel experiments, mind games, and constant physical torture. But Lyra remained defiant. She had lost count of how many days it had been since her capture, but she knew one thing for sure: she would never give up. Each day, she could hear the sounds of the Jarkon guards patrolling outside her cell, their heavy boots clanking on the metal floors. Sometimes they would come in, mocking her in their harsh language, but Lyra would not let them see her fear. She had learned to close her mind to them, to block out the pain they caused. She would survive. That was the promise she made to herself. Her people had always been peaceful, preferring to live in harmony with the universe, to understand the mysteries of life. But the Jarkon saw them as weak. They wanted to force Lyra to reveal the secrets of her people. Secrets that could make them powerful beyond measure. But Lyra was not just any alien. She was the last of her kind, and she would not let the Jarkon destroy her world's legacy. The cell door creaked open, and Lyra stiffened, her heart racing. It was the Jarkon guards again, but this time they had brought someone new. Tall figure stood in the doorway, his face hidden behind a helmet. He wasn't one of the usual tormentors. The guards stepped aside, and the figure moved into the cell. Lyra studied him carefully. His armor was unlike anything she had seen before. It was sleek and black, with a faint glow at the seams. He was human, she realized. A human. But what was he doing here? The humans were supposed to be far away, battling their own wars. How had one of them ended up on a Jarkon world? Get up! The human's voice was deep and firm, but there was a gentleness to it that caught Lyra off. Guard. She didn't move at first. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but the human didn't seem threatening. He simply watched her, his eyes hidden beneath the helmet, but filled with something Lyra couldn't quite place. He took a step forward, and Lyra instinctively backed away, but she felt no fear. She had faced worse than this. She had faced pain, isolation, and fear every day since her people were captured. What was one more tormentor in the long line? But instead of the expected pain, the human crouched down in front of her, his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm here to help you," he said, his voice softer now. "I won't hurt you." Lyra narrowed her eyes. "Help?" She spoke the word in disbelief, for she had never known help since her capture. "Why would a human help me?" The human hesitated, his hand hovering over the control panel of her shackles. "I don't know why. Maybe because what they're doing to you is wrong. Maybe because I can't stand seeing innocent people suffer." His eyes were filled with something Lyra hadn't seen in a long time: compassion. She had thought compassion was a trait that had died with her people, but here, standing before her, was a human willing to give it. Lyra felt something stir inside her, something that had been buried deep down since the day of her capture. Hope. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. But after everything that had happened, it was hard to imagine that anyone would risk their life for her. She had seen too many others broken and discarded. Would she be next? "How can I trust you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the emotions stirring within her. She had learned to protect herself, to guard her heart from false promises. The human's eyes softened beneath his helmet. "I can understand why you don't trust me, but I'm not like them," he said. "I've seen too much injustice in my life to let something like this go unchallenged. You don't deserve this." For a moment, Lyra didn't know what to say. The words were foreign to her, but the sincerity in his voice left no doubt. He was telling the truth. There was something about him, something different. He didn't belong here with the Jarkon. He was out of place, just like her. Her shackles made a soft humming sound as they deactivated. The human had somehow managed to disable them without her even noticing. Her arms and legs were free. "Come on," the human said, holding out his hand. "We don't have much time?" Lyra stared at the hand, hesitant for a moment. She had never been one to trust easily, but something about this human's presence made her want to take a chance. For the first time since her capture, she allowed herself to believe that there was hope. With a deep breath, she placed her hand in his. "Let's get out of here," she said quietly. The human nodded, a small but sincere smile hidden beneath his helmet. "We will." Together they turned toward the exit, not knowing what dangers awaited them. But Lyra was no longer alone. She had the strength of a human at her side. And for the first time, she felt the possibility of freedom. Jason could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had never planned to get involved in anything like this, but the moment he had seen Lyra, broken, imprisoned, and tortured, he knew he couldn't just walk away. His orders had been simple: gather intelligence, report back, and avoid getting involved in any personal matters. But saving her had become personal. It had become about more than just a mission. It was about doing what was right, the inside of the Jarkon. Fortress was like nothing he had ever seen before. Cold metallic walls stretched out in every direction, covered in flashing lights and strange symbols. The air was thick with the smell of machinery, and the sound of distant footsteps echoed off the corridors. He was alone now, having managed to get away from the guards after helping Lyra escape. The human soldiers he had once worked with were far away, and the idea of a rescue mission seemed almost impossible, but Jason had never been one to give up easily. After he had freed Lyra from her shackles, he had told her to go, to escape. She had hesitated, but in the end, she had trusted him. She had gone, and Jason had stayed behind to draw the attention away from her. His heart had raced as the alarm sounded, the Jarkon realizing the prisoner was gone. They would be looking for her, and soon. Jason needed a plan. He crouched behind a stack of crates, his mind working furiously. He knew the layout of the fortress, having studied it briefly while pretending to be one of the Jarkon soldiers. He had learned that there were only a few ways out, and all of them were heavily guarded. Getting past the guards would be a challenge, but not impossible. He would have to use his skills to outsmart them. Jason had spent years in various military units, trained in both combat and strategy. But nothing had ever prepared him for a situation like this. He wasn't just fighting an enemy. He was trying to rescue someone who was in more danger than he could imagine. Lyra wasn't just a prisoner, she was a target. The Jarkon would stop at nothing to get her back, and they wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who stood in their way. His mind raced as he formulated a plan. First, he needed to disable the security systems. If he could find a way to cut off their surveillance, they would have a much better chance of getting out unnoticed. Jason had already taken note of a control room on the map of the fortress. It was deep inside the building, and getting there would require sneaking past several Jarkon soldiers. But it was the best shot he had. He glanced at his surroundings. The dark corridors were quiet now, but he could hear distant voices from the guards. He had to move quickly. Jason stood up, his body tense, and began to make his way down the corridor. Every step he took was calculated, careful. He had to blend in with the environment, to be as silent as possible. He couldn't afford any mistakes. Jason reached the first checkpoint without incident. The guards at this post were distracted, probably too busy with their own affairs to notice him. He slipped past them, keeping to the shadows. As he continued deeper into the fortress, he felt the weight of the mission pressing harder on his shoulders. The closer he got to the control room, the more dangerous it became. The Jarkon were known for their advanced technology and military prowess. This wasn't just any fortress. It was a place designed to keep intruders out. But Jason had no intention of being an intruder. He was here to rescue Lyra, and he was not going to fail. He moved silently through the halls, his footsteps echoing softly against the walls. Every corner he turned felt like a trap waiting to spring. But his training had prepared him for situations like this. He didn't panic. He didn't hesitate. He simply focused on his goal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jason arrived at the control room. It was heavily guarded, just as he had expected. 2 Jarkon soldiers stood at attention outside the door. Jason crouched behind a corner, watching them closely. He knew he couldn't just walk in. The guards were too sharp for that. He needed to think of a way to neutralize them. Jason's mind raced as he quickly assessed the situation. He spotted a maintenance closet nearby and silently crept toward it. Inside, he found some tools and a few old supplies. He grabbed a small, metallic object that looked like a standard-issue EMP device. It was used for disabling electronic equipment. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it would do the trick. Jason carefully approached the guards, staying out of their line of sight. He waited for the right moment. When the guards were focused on the control panel, their backs turned to him. With a quick motion, he activated the EMP device. A small pulse of energy radiated outward, knocking out the guards' weapons and the surveillance system in the area. The guards froze, confused by the sudden power surge. Jason didn't waste any time. He moved quickly, taking down the first guard with a swift strike to the back of the neck. The second guard turned just in time to see Jason's fist connect with his jaw, knocking him unconscious. The guards were down, and Jason had gained access to the control room. Inside, the room was filled with screens and blinking lights, monitoring the entire fortress. Jason approached the main terminal and began to work quickly. He needed to disable the fortress's security system so that Lyra could escape without being tracked. His fingers moved over the keys, typing commands into the terminal as fast as he could. It wasn't long before the security system shut down. The screens went blank, and the fortress fell into darkness. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't have time to celebrate. He had done his part, but now he needed to find Lyra and get her out before the Jarkon discovered what had happened. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted through the dark, cold halls of the Jarkon fortress. The walls around her seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer with every step. She had never felt so alone, so vulnerable. Yet, the feeling of freedom, even for a brief moment, pushed her forward. She had to get out. She had to escape. It was hard to remember the last time she had been free. Before the invasion, before the Jarkon had come to Elysis and destroyed everything, Lyra had known peace. Her people had lived in harmony with the land, and no one had ever dreamed of such cruelty. Now, all that was left of her world was a broken memory, a memory that haunted her every waking moment. But Lyra had not been completely defeated, not yet. Even in the face of pain, fear, and endless torment, she had held onto hope. And now, with the human, Jason, by her side, she had a chance. For the first time since her capture, she could see the possibility of escape. The Jarkon fortress was massive, its corridors twisting and turning in confusing patterns. Lyra had never been allowed to explore the halls during her captivity, but she had observed the layout from her cell, learning the routes the guards took, memorizing the sounds of their footsteps. She had to make it out alive. That was all that mattered. As she rounded a corner, Lyra nearly collided with a group of Jarkon soldiers. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The soldiers were coming her way, and there was nowhere to hide. Her heart raced, and panic gripped her chest. The Jarkon would capture her again. They would make her suffer more than she ever had before. But then, something unexpected happened. From the shadows ahead, a figure stepped out. It was Jason. He moved quickly, silently, as if he had been waiting for this moment. In one swift motion, he took out 2 of the Jarkon's soldiers, knocking them out without a sound. Lyra watched in disbelief, her mouth slightly open. The human had just taken down 2 of the most dangerous creatures she had ever seen with ease. She had never imagined that someone like him could have such skill. Jason looked back at her, his face serious but calm. "You're safe," he said quietly, though the words seemed almost too simple for the situation. He didn't waste time explaining himself or asking questions. There was no time for that. With the guards down, Jason motioned for Lyra to follow him. They moved quickly, slipping through the shadows, their footsteps soft on the cold metal floors. Lyra had never seen anyone move with such precision, such confidence. Jason's every move seemed calculated, deliberate. It was like he was in complete control of everything around him. The silence between them spoke volumes. Lyra was still trying to process what had just happened. She had trusted Jason before, but now, as they ran through the fortress together, something in her heart told her that he wasn't just a soldier. He was something more. They reached a narrow corridor that led to an elevator shaft. Jason stopped, his eyes scanning the area. "We need to hurry," he said, his voice low. "The Jarkon will be looking for us. We don't have much time." Lyra nodded, her heart still racing, but there was a sense of calmness in her now. She was with him. She wasn't alone anymore. Together, they could escape. Together, they could survive. Jason pressed a button on the wall and a metal door slid open. The elevator shaft inside was dimly lit, the only light coming from the faint glow of distant security lights. Jason stepped inside, turning to make sure Lyra was following him. "You sure you can do this?" Jason asked, giving her a brief glance. Lyra hadn't spoken much since their escape, but she could see the concern in his eyes. He was worried about her, and that made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. She was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make it out of here alive. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She was still weak from the days of torture, but the strength inside her had begun to return. The feeling of hope, of freedom, was growing with every step they took. Jason nodded and pressed a button to begin the descent. The elevator slowly moved down, the hum of the machinery filling the silence between them. As they descended, Lyra couldn't help but glance at Jason. He was human, and she had heard stories of his people, stories of how they had once been on the brink of extinction themselves, struggling to survive. Yet here he was, standing with her, risking everything to help her escape. She had always heard of humans as being strong, but now she saw just how much their strength was not just physical, but mental as well. They were resilient, driven by a fierce sense of justice and willing to fight for what was right. "Why are you helping me?" Lyra asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. She had meant to ask him this from the beginning, but now, in the quiet of the elevator, the question seemed to demand an answer. Jason's eyes softened. He didn't speak immediately, as if weighing the words. "I couldn't just leave you," he finally said. "I've seen too much suffering, too much injustice, and I couldn't let them do this to you. No one deserves to live like that, especially not someone like you." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in ages. It wasn't love, she wasn't ready to label it that, but it was something. Something that made her feel like there was a future ahead. Jason's words meant more to her than he could ever know. The elevator stopped with a soft chime, and the door opened to a dark, empty hall. Jason looked both ways, then motioned for Lyra to follow him. They were getting closer now. She could feel it. She wasn't just escaping from the Jar Khan anymore, she was escaping into a future. A future where she might be able to find peace again, or at least the chance to rebuild. As they moved through the corridors, Lyra stayed close to Jason, her every sense alert. She had been on the run before, but this time, it felt different. With Jason by her side, she felt like there was hope. They could do this. Together. Jason and Lyra moved swiftly through the darkened halls of the Jarkhan fortress. The silence around them was almost oppressive, each step they took seeming to echo through the empty corridors. But Jason didn't stop. He knew they didn't have much time. The Jarkhan would soon discover that Lyra had escaped, and when they did, they would stop at nothing to find her. Every second counted. Lyra, still shaken from the recent events, walked close behind him. Her feet felt heavy, her body weak from the constant pain she had endured. But the spark of hope that had ignited within her earlier was now growing brighter. She was free. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could move without fear of being tortured, without being watched. There was something powerful in that freedom. As they rounded another corner, Jason held up his hand, signaling for Lyra to stop. He paused, his sharp eyes scanning the area. The faint hum of Jarkhan technology buzzed in the distance, but otherwise, the hall was empty. Jason took a deep breath and whispered, "We're close, but we need to be careful. There are guards just ahead." Lyra nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She could sense the danger, too. The Jarkhan were ruthless, and if they caught even a glimpse of her, they would immediately know something was wrong. The thought of being captured again sent a chill down her spine. Jason moved toward a small access door on the side of the corridor. It was a maintenance hatch, one that he had noted earlier when he studied the fortress's layout. It was small, but would give them access to a hidden passage, one that led outside the fortress walls. Lyra wasn't sure where it would take them, but it was better than being out in the open, where they could be seen by the Jarkhan. He motioned for Lyra to follow him. Together, they moved cautiously toward the hatch, and with a quick press of a button, the door slid open. Inside, it was dark, but Jason didn't hesitate. He stepped in, and Lyra followed closely behind. The hatch closed quietly behind them, and they were engulfed in darkness. Jason pulled out a small flashlight from his pack, the beam cutting through the blackness. They were in a narrow tunnel now, the walls made of cold, metallic material. The air was stale, but at least it was quiet. They moved slowly, keeping close to the walls to avoid making noise. Every step felt like it could be their last. But Jason's calmness seemed to reassure Lyra. She trusted him, more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. As they advanced through the tunnel, Lyra's mind wandered back to the day of her capture. She remembered the Jarkhan soldiers storming her home, destroying everything in their path. They had come with force, demanding that her people submit to their rule, but her people had fought back, and that had made them targets. Lyra had been one of the few to survive. But now, after everything, she had to wonder if there was any chance of rebuilding. Could she truly escape the shadow of the Jarkhan? Or would they follow her wherever she went? Jason's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're almost there," he said quietly, his words steady but urgent. "Just stay close, and don't make a sound." Lyra nodded, pushing the questions aside, for the moment. She had to focus. They had come this far. She couldn't let herself get distracted now. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel began to slope upward, and the sound of distant footsteps could be heard. Lyra froze, her heart racing in her chest. Jason's grip on her arm tightened, and he motioned for her to stay silent. They ducked down into a small alcove just off the path, hiding in the shadows. 2 Jarkon guards walked past them, their heavy boots thudding on the metal floor. Lyra held her breath, praying they wouldn't stop or look in their direction. She could feel Jason's tense presence beside her, his eyes trained on the guards. The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Finally, the guards turned a corner and were out of sight. Jason let out a quiet exhale and motioned for Lyra to follow him. They quickly moved down the tunnel, but Lyra's mind was still racing. The guards had been so close, so very close. It was a miracle they hadn't been caught. They continued to move through the passage, and soon the sound of the outside world became faintly audible. The wind, the distant hum of ships. Lyra felt a rush of excitement. They were so close. The exit was just ahead. Jason slowed his pace as they neared the end of the tunnel. He paused for a moment, glancing at Lyra. "This is it," he said. "Stay behind me. I'll go first and make sure the coast is clear." Lyra nodded again, her heart beating fast. She couldn't believe it. They were about to be free. The thought of stepping out into the open air, away from the Jarkon, made her feel like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Jason reached the end of the tunnel and carefully pushed open a small hatch. The bright light of the outside world flooded in, blinding them for a moment. Lyra shielded her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin for the first time in what seemed like forever. Jason stepped out first, his eyes scanning the area. He motioned for Lyra to follow him. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping out into the open air. The sight of the sky, blue and vast, was almost overwhelming. The ground beneath her feet felt real again. She was no longer trapped in that cold, dark fortress. "We did it," Jason said, his voice full of quiet satisfaction. Lyra looked around, taking in her surroundings. They were on the outskirts of the Jarkon base, near a forested area that led to the mountains. It was a remote place, one that was far from the heavily guarded core of the fortress. They would be safe here for now. "Thank you," Lyra said softly, her voice trembling slightly. She didn't know what else to say. He had done what no one else would have dared to do. He had saved her. Jason gave her a quick smile. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said. "But we'll make it. We'll find a way." Lyra nodded, feeling the strength of his words. Together, they would make it. Together, they could survive. The road ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time in a long time, Lyra believed that hope could be real. And with Jason by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The night was cold as Jason and Lyra trudged through the dense forest. The Jarkon fortress was behind them now, but danger still lurked around every corner. They had managed to escape the fortress, but they knew they hadn't outrun the Jarkon entirely. The soldiers would be searching for them, and the longer they stayed in one place, the higher the chance that they would be caught. Jason moved ahead, his eyes scanning the dark woods for any signs of danger. He could hear the distant howls of the wind, but other than that, the forest was eerily quiet. Lyra walked beside him, her feet dragging with exhaustion. She had come a long way since their escape, but the toll of the past few days was beginning to show. Her body was weak, her energy drained, but the thought of freedom pushed her forward. She had made it this far, and she wasn't about to give up now. Jason noticed how tired she looked. Her pale skin, once glowing with strength, was now drawn and weary. He wanted to tell her to rest, but he knew they couldn't afford to stop. The Jarkon were relentless. They wouldn't rest until they had found Lyra. Jason had been in dangerous situations before. He had fought battles, faced enemies, and stared death in the face more times than he cared to count. But none of that had prepared him for this. None of it had prepared him for the realization that the innocent alien girl at his side, the one who had been tortured by the Jarkan, was counting on him now. He had made a promise to himself that he wouldn't let anything happen to her. He wouldn't let the Jarkan win, and if that meant pushing himself beyond his limits, then that was what he would do. "Are you okay?" Jason asked, glancing at Lyra. She was walking with her head lowered, her eyes distant. Lyra blinked and looked up at him, her expression blank for a moment before a faint smile crossed her face. "I'm fine. Just tired." She paused and added softly, "I didn't think I'd ever be free again." Jason nodded, understanding more than she could know. "You are free, and I'll make sure it stays that way." They continued on in silence for a while. The forest was dense with trees, their branches twisting overhead like dark fingers. The ground was uneven, making every step a challenge. The cold air bit at their skin, but Jason barely noticed. His mind was focused on the task ahead, finding a way to keep Lyra safe and getting them out of Jarkan territory. After a while, they came across a small clearing, the moonlight casting long shadows across the ground. Jason stopped, raising a hand to signal to Lyra. "We need to be careful. We're not far from the edge of their patrol range. If we're not careful, they'll catch us." Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the dark trees around them. She knew the Jarkan wouldn't give up easily. The thought of being captured again made her stomach turn, but she refused to let it stop her. She had come this far, and she wouldn't be dragged back into that dark prison. Jason crouched down, pulling a small device from his pack. It was a basic tracker, one he'd used in previous missions. It could pinpoint Jarkan patrols and give them a better idea of which direction to avoid. He flipped it on, watching as the device flickered to life. A soft beep sounded, indicating the presence of patrols nearby. "We need to go around them," Jason muttered, studying the map on the device. "If we take this route, we should avoid detection. It'll be slower, but it's the safest option." Lyra nodded again, feeling a surge of gratitude for Jason's careful planning. He wasn't just strong, he was smart. She had seen it earlier when he outsmarted the Jarkan at the fortress. And now, in this moment of silence between them, she could see the depth of his commitment. It wasn't just about escaping. It was about making sure they survived. Jason was a man of his word. "We'll make it," she said, more to herself than to him. But Jason heard her words, and they seemed to give him strength. They continued moving through the forest, taking a path that would keep them hidden from view. The night seemed to stretch on forever. Lyra's legs ached, her body longing for rest. But she pushed forward. She knew that if she stopped, the fear would take over again. The Jarkan were relentless, and they couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. After what felt like hours of walking, they finally reached a small cave. It was hidden behind thick foliage, and the entrance was narrow, but it would offer them some protection from the Jarkan patrols. Jason checked the area, making sure the coast was clear before signaling to Lyra to follow him inside. The cave was cool and damp, but it was a welcome shelter. They sat down against the wall, both of them exhausted. Jason pulled out some basic rations from his pack, offering one to Lyra. She took it without saying a word, grateful for the small kindness. She wasn't hungry, but she knew it was necessary to keep her strength up. Jason ate in silence, his mind racing. They were safe for now, but for how long? The Jarkan would be searching every inch of the planet for Lyra. They couldn't stay in the cave forever. They would need a plan, one that would get them far away from the Jarkan and to a place where they could regroup and figure out what to do next. "You're doing great," Jason said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but Lyra could hear the underlying concern. "We'll get through this, together." Lyra looked at him, meeting his gaze for the first time in a while. She had been running on instinct, But now, hearing his words, something in her heart lifted. She had never had someone fight for her before. She had never known someone who would risk everything to help her. But now, standing in this cave with Jason, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this fight. Maybe there was hope. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "For everything." Jason nodded, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together." As they sat there in the cave, the distant sound of the Jar Khan searching for them, Lyra felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The road ahead would be dangerous, but she had Jason by her side, and with him, she felt like she could face whatever came next. The days since they had escaped the Jar Khan fortress felt like a blur. Jason and Lyra had traveled through forests, across rocky hills, and over barren lands, always staying ahead of the Jar Khan patrols. But now, they were at a crossroads. The Jar Khan would not give up their search. Soon, they would catch up to them. They were closing in, and Jason knew it was time to take a stand. The small cave where they had taken refuge was no longer safe. The Jar Khan were too close, and Jason could feel the tension building. He looked at Lyra, who was sitting by the cave's entrance, her eyes scanning the horizon. She was exhausted, her strength barely enough to keep her moving forward. Yet despite everything, she never gave up. She had become more than a symbol of hope for Jason. She had become a reminder of what they were fighting for. "We can't keep running forever," Jason said, his voice quiet but firm. Lyra looked up at him, her face weary, but her determination clear. "I know," she replied softly. "We have to fight." Jason nodded. He had been thinking about this moment for days. They had no choice but to confront the Jar Khan. They couldn't outrun them, and they couldn't hide forever. It was time to end this, to give Lyra the chance to live the life she deserved. Jason turned to the small bag he had carried with him since the beginning of their journey. Inside, he had supplies, rations, medical kits, and weapons. They were both familiar with combat, but the odds were stacked against them. The Jar Khan were powerful, and they outnumbered them. Yet Jason knew there was something the Jar Khan didn't have. Heart. The will to fight for what was right, for freedom. "We can't do this alone," Jason said, his voice resolute. "But we don't have to. I've been in situations like this before. I know how to get allies." Lyra raised an eyebrow, curious but skeptical. "Allies? Who would help us? The Jar Khan control everything here?" Jason smiled, though it was a grim expression. "Not everyone is on their side. There are factions within their ranks, rebels who don't agree with their ways. I've been in contact with a few." Lyra's eyes widened slightly. "You've been planning this all along?" Jason's smile faded. "I've been trying to find a way to get you out of here, Lyra, and if it means making some allies, then so be it." They didn't have much time. The Jar Khan were closing in, and Jason knew they couldn't afford to wait. The only way out was to take the fight to them. They gathered their things, and Jason led the way, guiding Lyra toward the location where the rebels were supposed to meet them. It was a small group, just a few individuals who had become disillusioned with the Jar Khan's cruelty. They were scattered, hiding in the shadows, but they were still determined to fight for what was right. After a few hours of walking through dense forest, they reached a clearing. In the center, hidden beneath a large, overgrown tree, stood a small group of rebels. They looked like ordinary Jar Khan soldiers at first glance, but their eyes told a different story. These were the ones who had seen the injustice, who had heard the cries of those the Jar Khan had tortured and enslaved. These were the ones who had turned their backs on the Empire. Jason stepped forward, and the rebels immediately recognized him. He had worked with them before, under different circumstances, but their loyalty to him had not wavered. "You're late," one of the rebels, A tall Jarkhan with dark blue scales said gruffly, "What took you so long?" Jason didn't waste time on pleasantries. "The Jarkhan are getting closer. We don't have much time. We need to move now." The rebels nodded, their faces hardening with resolve. They were ready. "Where's the girl?" one of them asked, his eyes scanning the forest. Jason motioned toward Lyra, who stepped out from behind him. The moment the rebels saw her, their eyes softened, though their expressions remained grim. They knew the story of Lyra, of her people's destruction, and of the Jarkhan's cruelty. She had become a symbol of resistance, even though she was just one person. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's finish this." The plan was simple, but it was dangerous. They would infiltrate the Jarkhan's base, disable their communications, and make sure that no one would be able to call for reinforcements. It was a risky move, but they had no choice. If they didn't act now, they would be caught and killed. Rebels moved swiftly, working together with Jason and Lyra to infiltrate the base. The plan worked perfectly. They slipped through the outer defenses and made it to the communications room. Jason and the rebels quickly disabled the equipment, ensuring that no distress signals could be sent. It was only a matter of time before the Jarkhan realized what had happened. But by then, it would be too late. Lyra's heart raced as they moved through the dark corridors, but Jason's calm presence kept her grounded. They were so close now. She could feel it. This was their chance to make the Jarkhan pay for what they had done. But as they reached the final room, disaster struck. The Jarkhan forces had discovered their plan. A large group of soldiers burst into the corridor, blocking their escape. Jason's heart raced as he saw the soldiers' weapons raised, ready to fire. They had been cornered. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes narrowing with determination. "No more running," she said, her voice filled with fierce resolve. Jason looked at her, surprised by the strength in her words. He had never seen her like this, standing tall, ready to fight. Together, they turned to face the Jarkhan. The battle was intense. The rebels fought with everything they had, but they were outnumbered. Jason and Lyra fought side by side, using every skill and tactic. They knew to stay alive. The Jarkhan were strong, but Jason had one advantage: his heart. He fought for something bigger than himself, and that made all the difference. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the Jarkhan soldiers fell. The rebels stood victorious, breathing heavily, but alive. Jason and Lyra stood together, looking over the battlefield. The Jarkhan had been defeated, but this was only the beginning. The fight for freedom was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a glimmer of hope. She had her freedom, and now she had something even more important: the chance to rebuild, to fight for a future without fear. Jason turned to her, a small but proud smile on his face. "We did it," he said. Lyra smiled back, her heart full of gratitude and determination. "We're just getting started.